The other day, it was early in the morning, I was standing in the kitchen, and my 7-year-old son, Samuel, came down to me and he said, "Dad?" I said, "Yeah." I was expecting him to say, "Good morning. I love you. You're the best. Or at least, can I have breakfast?" Instead, he said, "Dad?" "Yes, son." "Where's Nikki?" "What am I, chopped liver?" "Dad, where's Nikki?" Now, something you need to know is that I was divorced and remarried very early on in Sam's life. So from the time he was about a year and a half, he's only known Nikki to be a mother figure. He deeply loves her, and the two of them are very close. And so first thing in the morning, "Dad, where's Nikki?" Now, Sam's reality is that he has two parents in my house and another parent in another house. Now, today's families, even families of clergy, are not as homogeneous as they once were. And most of the families, or a lot of the families at KNOX, just don't look like the Cleavers from Leave It to Beaver. And that's because families in Canada rarely represent the ideal family unit of two parents, a boy, and a girl, and an obedient dog. Now, I have two boys and a dog. The dog is far from obedient, as are the boys. So, in this changing family structure, a question is pushed to the forefront, and that question is, what makes a family? It once was that a family unit was far more broad than a husband and a wife, two kids and a dog. It included parents and grandparents, kids and grandkids, maybe even neighbors or nephews. And there are many cultures today who would never consider putting mom in a home when she turned 85. No, mom stays with us until she dies, whether she likes it or not. Or we can no longer physically care for her, and she must then go to the hospital. Now today, with the legalization of same-sex marriage, the increase in blended families, adoption, and unmarried couples living together, buying property, having kids, it's a valid question to ask. What makes a family? Now, you might be surprised to find out that this is exactly the question that the Apostle Paul is asking in chapter 4, the letter to the Romans. He writes, "What then shall we say? That Abraham, our ancestor according to the flesh, has discovered regarding this matter." Now, this matter that Paul references is the question of who is part of the covenant of righteousness. Who is declared righteous in God's sight? Who is part of God's family? Remember, last week we observed that Paul had been a lawyer, and he was putting all of humanity on trial. And that Paul declares that we are without excuse, that we should stop our mouths and accept that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But that a righteousness from God has been revealed through Jesus Christ, and that is why, after all, we may actually be declared right through Christ. But Paul knows, after saying all of this, that there will be some objections and some questions. And one of those objections will come from the Jewish Christians who will say, "But we are children of Abraham. We are his offspring. His covenant is for us. Just look down. We're all circumcised dudes here. That's your proof." And to this, Paul asks that important question, what makes a family? Specifically, the family of Abraham. Because remember, Paul has said that Jesus did not come to throw out the covenant that was made with Abraham. In fact, Jesus came to fulfill it. Well, what covenant was that? Well, the covenant was simply this, well, not simply, but profoundly this, that Abraham's offspring, even though he was very old, would be so numerous they could not be counted. The second part of that covenant was that God would give to Abraham and his descendants a piece of land known as the Promised Land. So, God promised Abraham countless offspring and a whole lot of real estate. And a little while thereafter, as a sign of that covenant, Abraham was circumcised. And all his kids and his grandkids and all of the men were circumcised. And for hundreds of years, those boys looked down and they said, "Yep, I'm a member of the family of Abraham." But Paul, like many today, has the audacity to suggest that they need to redefine family, at least the family of Abraham. The circumcision and perhaps dark hair and a proclivity towards accounting are not the determining factors of those who are part of Abraham's family. You see, for Paul, the sign of being part of the family is faith. He writes, "Is this blessedness then for the circumcision or also for the uncircumcision? For we say, faith was credited to Abraham as righteousness." After all, wasn't Abraham just an ordinary heathen before he was called by God? And was Abraham even circumcised when God made that promise to Abraham? Here's Paul's argument. How then was it credited to him, to Abraham? Was he circumcised at the time of that promise or not? No, he was not circumcised. He was uncircumcised. So he's arguing, how can circumcision be the most important part? He continues, "And he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by what? By faith, while he was still uncircumcised, so that he would become the father of all those who believe, but have never been circumcised, that they too could have righteousness credited to them." See, here's the thing about circumcision. Circumcision was a seal, but not the thing itself. For example, many of you might have a wedding ring on your left hand. It appears that I do not. Do you? Yeah? Okay. I do, she says. If I take my ring off, pretending that I have it, am I still married? Right. If I put it back on, am I any more married than I was with it off? No. Which is why I don't feel like I have to wear it all the time. The outward symbol, dear friends, is not the thing that counts. What really counts, and I'm not sure I can convince Nikki of this, but what really counts is the promise. And even deeper than that, the belief in the promise is what really counts. Belief that the one to whom you have promised to be faithful will be faithful to you. And belief that you yourself will be faithful to them. But of course, the promise means nothing, and that faith means nothing if you don't have follow-through. Paul continues, "And he, Abraham, is also the father of the circumcised, who are not only circumcised, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham possessed while he was still uncircumcised." So, what makes the family of Abraham a family if it isn't ethnicity? It is, quite simply, those who walk in the faith of Abraham. You see, the covenant made with Abraham, it had been misunderstood over the years. They assumed that when God promised children, he meant only physical offspring. And when he said, I'll give you that land, it meant only a small, hotly contested place on the Gaza Strip. But as Jesus and then Paul later points out, this faith is for all who call on the name of the Lord. And the promised land is actually the whole world. Paul writes, for the promise to Abraham, to his descendants, that he would inherit the world, was not fulfilled through the law, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. For if they became heirs by the law, faith is empty, and the promise is nullified. The other day, Paxton was in a great mood, and Nikki was playing with him, and Nikki was holding him, and he was being all adorable and 9 months old and stuff. And Sam came up to us, and of course Paxton is Nikki's biological son, and they have a tremendous bond. And as Sam came up and wrapped his arms around Nikki and started to cuddle her, 9-month-old Paxton got a weird look on his face, and he looked up at Sam like, that's my mom. What are you doing hugging my mom? Usurper. And Sam just stopped. He looked down at Paxton and he said, Paxton, your mummy has 2 sons, and I'm one of them. Good for him. We can observe that family is about more than blood. It always has been. I remember listening to a radio program about adoption. And when this woman told the story about when one of her adopted kids asked her if she loved him any less than her real kids, she said, you are my real kid. And he said, yes, but I didn't come from your tummy. We're not blood and blood. We're not real family. And she looked down at her little son and she said, your father and I are not blood relations, but we are the foundation of this family. When I heard that, something went off of me like, how true. A family is formed when 2 people who are not related, hopefully, marry. Some places in the southern states. When we come together and we form a family, it is the promise. And it is the belief in that promise that unites us, not blood. Definitions of family have always been fluid. Even if the 1950s nuclear family is still held up as the ideal in North American churches. But many of you are proof that family is made through promise and faithfulness to that promise. I've seen many a parent abandon his blood-related child. And I've seen many a step-parent step into that gap and claim that child as his own or her own. I've seen broken people, abused people, outcast people, and unlikely people make and keep promises to be family. Are our families always ideal? Maybe not. Then again, I've never met the ideal family that wasn't on TV. You see, what matters most is our commitment to one another and not our blood relationship. And my eldest son is living proof as he explains his relationship to his stepmom so simply. Paxton, your mommy has 2 sons, and I'm one of them. For Sam, genealogy has never been the defining characteristic of a parent. that this woman toilet trained him, bandaged his boo-boos, gave him hugs and kisses, taught him how to read, bought him clothes, and was always there for a good heart-to-heart about the trials and tribulations of grade 2. That has made them family. His faith that she will always love and care for him makes them family, and his faith in that promise. And it's the same with the family of God. It was never about who was circumcised, who best kept the law, or who could trace their lineage back to Abraham. It was always about those who said to God, I trust in you. I know you will take care of me. I have faith in your promise. And so to illustrate his point even further, Paul does something really neat here. He contrasts the characteristics of the sinful humanity that he talked about in chapters 1 to 3 with the life of Abraham. And in so doing, he demonstrates how Abraham is truly the father of all the faithful, whether Jew or Gentile. So here's what he does. And if you think Paul is just, randomly writing a bunch of stuff, you're going to see here how everything from the first 3 chapters is leading to a point. So, first of all, he contrasts human beings who ignored God, the Creator, and Abraham who believed in God as Creator and life giver. And human beings who knew about God's power but didn't worship him. And Abraham who recognized God's power and trusted him to use it. And then human beings who didn't give God the glory he was due. And Abraham who glorified God. And human beings who dishonored God with their bodies by worshiping beings that were not divine, made up creatures. But Abraham, who worshiped the God who gives new life, found that his own body was given renewed vitality so that he could actually procreate even in an advanced age. And human beings ignoring the call in Genesis to procreate and turn to same-sex relations. Abraham desired to fulfill the call to procreation and accomplished it through faith. Deep within the heart of God's covenant promise lies the fulfillment of the basic commandment back in Genesis 1. The command which goes with creation of male and female in God's image to be fruitful and to multiply. And as Romans 4 comes towards its end, we realize what Paul is saying, that on a large scale, the ancient Jewish dream had been fulfilled. God called Abraham to undo the sin of the human race, and this is how it happened. That God is the God of new hope, of fresh creation. But of course, this didn't happen through Abraham alone. You see, Abraham was a signpost pointing towards the goal itself, and the goal itself has been reached in Jesus, in the events of his death and resurrection. And so we can contrast sinful humanity, Abraham's life, and the life of Jesus. If Abraham is a signpost who believed in God as creator and life giver, Jesus was creator and new life giver. And as Abraham recognized God's power and trusted him to use it, Jesus lived completely in God's power, healing, performing miracles, resurrecting, and other things. And as Abraham gave God the glory, Jesus glorified his heavenly Father at all times in all things that he did. And Abraham, through worshiping the God who gives new life, was given renewed vitality. And Jesus communed with God continually and was not only renewed to procreate, he was given life from the dead, the ultimate new life. And Abraham desired to fulfill the call to procreation. He accomplished it through faith. And what does it say about Jesus? That he is the firstborn from among the dead. And that we who follow in faith and believe in him, we are his brothers and we are his sisters. And so, as we wrap up this first great section of Romans, we find the answer to that question, what makes us a family? At least the family of Abraham. And if Abraham is the father of all believers, the answer is clear, that faith makes a family. Trust in the promises we make to one another. Trust in the promise that God makes to us. We are children of God when we trust in the promise of God. It's not circumcision or teaching Sunday school or even, dare I say it, the sinner's prayer. We're children of Abraham and children of the covenant, declared righteous in God's sight when we, through Christ, enter into a trusting relationship with God, when faith makes us a family. And this, it raises all kinds of interesting questions, which Paul will address pretty soon. And we'll explore that when I come back, such as, do we share Abraham's faith? Do we look in love, gratitude, and trust in the Creator who promises impossible things and brings them to pass? Have we learned to celebrate God and to live as one family with all those who share in this faith and hope? And these are all great questions, and I hope you will join me when I return in a few weeks as we continue to travel down this Romans road together. Let us pray.